The vice presidential debate raising new questions for voters ahead of the upcoming November election. California Senator Kamala Harris squaring off with Vice President Mike Pence over issues ranging from the coronavirus to criminal justice reform. And joining me now by Zoom is San Jose State political science professor Donna. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be here, Michelle. Thanks.
Okay, so we have a lot to unpack today. First of all, the debate, it opened up with a pandemic. Of course, that's on everyone's minds. When asked if Senator Harris would take a COVID-19 vaccine now, she responded only under the advice of top public health officials like Dr. Fauci. The vice president said Senator Harris was undermining public confidence in science by doubting the current administration's efforts to develop a vaccine. So my question is, are politics impacting the United States recovery from the coronavirus?
Oh, I think politics have been threaded into our reaction to the pandemic from day one or even before day one, for sure. And they continue to make an appearance. My assessment of this, of course, is that Vice President Pence had a pretty big hill to climb last night in defending the administration's record on the COVID pandemic. And he did what I would have advised that I worked for him, which is go on offense.
And he certainly did that. And he was on offense, especially when it came to COVID, because he sits on the task force. And so Kamala Harris, she did have a lot of points thrown at him. Both of them kind of dodged some questions. We're going to talk about one in particular in just a bit. But I do want to talk about transparency, because that was discussed early in the night as well. The transparency, of course, of the president's health while at Walter Reed Medical Center as he's recovering from coronavirus. And then also his tax returns came up, which is something we've been hearing about since 2016. Do you see transparency as an issue for voters on both sides of the aisle?
Yeah, I think voters do care about transparency. I think they care about other matters more. So I think there are a lot of people who are probably not getting exactly the candidate they want, and transparency plays a part of that. But I do think issues like COVID, the economy, the need for recovery, economic justice, racial justice, Supreme Court seat, I think all those are higher priorities for voters.
Yeah, I found it interesting when they were talking about transparency and the medical records and things like that. That was a way for Senator Harris to bring up the tax returns, and she made some pretty good points when it came to that. Okay, let's go to criminal justice reform now. Senator Kamala Harris, she walked the tightrope last night. Vice President Pence, he attacked her record as San Francisco DA and State Attorney General. She's been targeted for her role in overseeing nearly 2,000 marijuana convictions in San Francisco. The vice president brought that up last night. Some say he's saying she's part of the radical left, but some say Harris isn't progressive enough. So she's also been outspoken about things like policing the police, racial profiling, police misconduct. What position does this put Senator Harris in ahead of November?
It's an interesting dynamic to watch because the vice president, I think, he's a smart, experienced politician. So what he knows is what the rest of us observe, that the country is actually prepared to fire the Trump-Pence administration. The question is the country prepared to hire a Biden-Harris administration? So Mr. Pence had to come into last night's debate with a strong defense of his administration's performance, but also he's looking to accomplish a second thing, which is to raise questions and doubts about the policies or the capabilities of a Biden-Harris administration. And I think that explains some of the strong attacks he made on her record. He's looking to raise doubts among her potential voters.
Yeah, and that was where you could tell that she was really playing defense, both obviously playing offense and defense throughout the night. But that, I think, really stood out in her defending her record, because she even brought it up in the next question. Okay, so let's talk about the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's set to begin Judge Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation hearings on Monday, the 12th. Her confirmation would likely assure a conservative majority on the United States Supreme Court. Now, considering Barrett's views on key issues like Roe v. Wade, is there a concern there for the future of women and reproductive rights?
The concern is as grave as I could possibly state. The right to choose hangs by by most counts, a 5-4 thread. Some decisions are 5-4, some decisions are 4-5. So already leaning away from reproductive rights. Amy Coney Barrett's views on Roe v. Wade are fairly well known. In fact, President Trump had a short list of potential names for a Supreme Court vacancy, and he himself said that the key criterion to be on that list was to be committed to overturning Roe. So I think we can glean as observers that that is likely the position she would have. Now, whether that case in particular presents itself before her is another question, but certainly there are already cases queued up that would further chip away at reproductive rights. And so this is a very high stakes vacancy for the Supreme Court.
Speaking of the Supreme Court, that, in my opinion, was the biggest question dodged by Kamala Harris, but it wasn't posed by the moderator. It was actually posed by the vice president when he asked her if she would be willing to pack the courts if the confirmation does go through. What was your take on that whole exchange?
I was interested to watch it, and her answer didn't surprise me, considering Mr. Biden also didn't answer the question last week. Clearly, Pence is going on offense here and trying to force Biden and Harris to navigate this space between a rock and a hard place. There is a lot of angst amongst liberals and on the left about the state of the Supreme Court. They really feel like the number of justices was adjusted, shall we say, 4 years ago when Merrick Garland didn't even get a hearing, let alone a vote in the Senate because of Mitch McConnell. And so their position is that the number of justices is not sacrosanct and that it should be expanded. Obviously, there's some case to be made for history, even though, of course, the number of justices isn't written into the Constitution, but some people like the idea of continuity. And so these are two cross currents, I think, that the Biden-Harris ticket needs to cross-navigate.
So what's your biggest takeaway from last night's debate?
I have I would say two big takeaways. First is I don't think it changed the fundamentals of the race very much. As I said before, I think the country, polling shows that the country is pretty displeased with the current administration and is ready to try a new team. The question is whether the country is also ready to hire this particular duo as its new team. So I think that didn't change last night. The second takeaway is I was very surprised to see Mike Pence's aggressiveness. He's an experienced politician. He's very smooth. He used to be a radio talk show host. He knows how to communicate well. And I was surprised that he took such a stance in terms of interrupting, talking over, exceeding his time, especially after the blowback that President Trump experienced last week. Especially talking over two women in a room is an interesting approach, considering that this is a ticket that very much needs to win back the suburbs if it's going to have any shot at overcoming this gap in the polls.
Yeah, but there were a few, I've heard a few opinions thrown around this morning about that because while he did interrupt and he most likely did get more time to explain his points, it seemed like neither one really got riled up. I mean, it certainly wasn't as contentious as the presidential debate last week.
It would be hard to be as contentious as that, to be fair.
True.
A thought that has occurred to me is that, perhaps his approach, which was unusual for him, he's usually a little more sedate. Perhaps his approach was intended to see if he could elicit a rise out of her. And that, unfortunately, falls into sort of a trap that we know exists in the American electorate, which is that voters tend to be harder on women in politics than men in politics. Voters expect them to be both very, very capable and also very likable. And those are both hard things to achieve, and they don't expect the same of men. So I wonder if there was a little bit of political jujitsu happening last night.
Very interesting. And then can I ask you a quick question before you go about the news this morning about the presidential debate next week going virtual and the president now threatening to not even be a part of that debate, saying he doesn't want to waste his time?
Yeah, boy, you can't turn off your news for 6 hours without something major happening these days, can you? So that's really interesting news. I do have to say it doesn't surprise me that much. I think after last week's performance, the president had already been musing aloud about whether future debates were in his interest, frankly, and the change in the rules gives him an opportunity to back out. He's a person who often says sort of the quiet part out loud, if you will, and he openly said, this is a situation in which they can simply turn me off if they want to, and that's clearly something he doesn't want to subject himself to.
Could that hurt him, though, because this is a town hall style, or was supposed to be a town hall style debate, which I think a lot of people were looking forward to, because this is when you hear more of the voices of the voters.
Yes, if I were working for him, he is down in the polls, and he's down in the polls persistently. That certainly doesn't predict an outcome, but if I were on that campaign, I would tell him that he needs to be throwing Hail Mary passes. And I think taking a pass on this one is not the way I would go. But of course, we know that he's his own campaign manager and his own strategist, so he makes those decisions himself. I feel fairly certain that he has staff around him feeling a little frustrated today.
Well, it certainly has been great talking to you, Professor Donna Crane of San Jose State. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right.